Welcome all to the Politics of Cinema, the show where, you guessed it, cinema and politics go hand in hand. My name is Aaron Spears.
And I'm Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we are wrapping up our art house horror series with a look at 2019's Midsommar.
Isaac, I have to say, I kind of wish October had a couple more weeks in it because I got personally and professionally a little bit busy and did not get in as much as I wanted to this October, looking at the horror in general, but art house horror specifically.
Well, I actually feel like I've watched more this year than ever before. Dangerously large amounts, in fact. It's really starting to get out of control, and it needs to end.
So you're glad October is finishing up here?
No, I mean, the problem is I now have a bunch more horror movies that I want to watch, but it's
Sure.
just like, you have to stop, Isaac. Like, you have to stop. I mean, this year has been weird, because, I mean, I liked it. So
Wait, 2020 has been weird?
Yeah.
How so?
But I would say that, like, I've watched more movies this year than any other year of my life. And I would say, that's because of Corona. That's not true at all. Because when I look at the first couple of months of the year, I was watching just as many movies. I think it was like a depressive spiral that started with, to be frank, not getting into PhD program. Hi, that's my life. And then going straight on from there. And then Corona just like picked that up. And we're just like, we're just going to watch it done. So I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have Halloween night movie plans?
That's a good question. I kind of do. I have a 12. No, actually, sorry, he had a birthday. I have a 13 and a 10-year-old. And out of an abundance of caution, we are not trick-or-treating this year or passing out candy. And we needed some replacement activities. So this is the long-winded answer of yes, there's some vague plans. We're going to do, we got some surprise candy. We're going to make them trick-or-treat at our back door for a while off and on. And then we're just going to set a candy timer to go off as we have a bonfire, play some spooky music and stuff outside. And then we're going to start off with some family-friendly stuff. Super 8. We're going to watch a bunch of the Treehouse of Terror, Treehouse of Horrors from The Simpsons back to back.
Like 90s ones? Or
I actually have a flash drive of it's a full collection of all of them we've gone through over the years. So I think we're going to focus on like the most recent 10 just to get a few hours in there. And then the kids are each picking out like who knows what quote unquote horror movie they're going to pick out. And then once they pass out, I'm going to watch some crazier stuff. So we're going to try and go all night long.
That sounds awesome. All right.
How about you?
You actually win because my plans are not quite as, So my plan basically, I mean, I've been invited to something, but I'm not going to go. But my plan is I've decided to create a tradition based off of last year. I'm going to watch Vincent Price's early 70s Theater of Blood, which I've probably talked about on this podcast before, is my sort of exemplar of everything that makes Vincent Price great. Because it's him doing Shakespeare and killing people in fun ways. And a young Diana Rigg, too. And then I'm going to watch, I hope I'm saying this right, Haxan?
I think so.
Yeah, the 1922 silent pseudo-documentary about witchcraft, which just looks amazing. I think last year I watched this, the silent, I think it's 28, I can't remember, Fan of the Opera. And I think what I've decided is like basically always watch always watch Theater of Blood and then watch a silent horror movie. I think that's my new Halloween thing.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, you're repeating the same titles or just you have it thematically, Vincent Price and then a silent?
I think maybe Theater of Blood might be permanent.
Oh, just that one's all the time. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. I remember I did that one year in high school. So like I'm the oldest and I have two younger siblings. And so I always used the excuse of like, well, I'm going to go with them to keep an eye on them. So I went trick-or-treating. I was like that kid. Also, I shot up to almost 6 feet tall as I went into ninth grade. So I was that kid who clearly looked too old to be trick-or-treating in our neighborhood. but I was there with my younger sibling. So like once they were like, okay, we're done with this, or, you know, I don't want to go out with my, you know, dorky older brother who overdoes it with the costumes and the makeup because I was a theater geek in high school. I remember starting to do like the last couple years I was in high school. There was this is going to date me, but there was a VHS rental store that would let you rent 5 movies for 5 days for $5. So I just started getting a stack of horror movies. Cause I'm a geek. It was usually the classics, meaning 40s through the 60s, and watching those on a 13-inch tube television in my room.
Well, that is almost too classic. Here's what I'll give you kudos, because there's always teenagers trick-or-treating and they're like almost never dressed in costumes, even though they're older and perfectly capable of actually putting together better costumes than the little kids.
Oh, for sure.
So I am all for giving like older kids or high school kids candy, but I am also for giving them shit when they don't even bother.
Right. Like, no, I bothered. That was I was actually trying to get my daughter that she's doing a gothic Red Riding Hood as her costume this year. She's our 10-year-old.
Oh, nice.
And she wants to do, we're still working on the makeup effects. She wanted to do a wolf scrape down the side of her face or across her face, with like a little bit of blood coming to the surface. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've definitely been able to do that at some point in my life. Let's break out the makeup and see what we can do with this. So we will see if that ends up happening or not, but it was tickling the old theater geek bones in me. So I was pretty excited for that. So hopefully there's another theater geek in the making here in our house, because she seemed pretty excited about putting that together.
Well, that's really cute and that's really nice.
I think I have a goth teen coming my way is what I'm trying to say there.
Well, you know, that's also classic. You know, everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Oh, I didn't mean that in a. I didn't mean that in a demeaning way. I was a punk teen. I was goth adjacent throughout my teenage years, so fine by me. Also, having gone through all the witchcraft movies, I can give her some tips on that creepy Red Riding Hood costume. So, before we jump into Midsommar, though, Isaac, we've been kind of genre hunting within the horror genre itself into the deep crevices of all the subgenres. We've gone through, 80. No, you did specifically late 80s vampire movies before. We've done like the nostalgia 80s stuff that I was watching. Did some 80s slasher looks at some of the 80s slasher movies. What have you been taking a look at subgenre wise this year? Or I'm sorry, this episode.
So I decided, I talked a bunch about vampires and things like that. I think this time I'm gonna try to point towards some good werewolf movies. And
this is a specialty of yours.
I actually would not say that.
I mean, from my perspective, I know very little about the genre, and anytime you talk about the genre, it makes me want to watch more.
I mean, here's the reality. Okay, so like werewolves are full of potential in terms of the subtext, right? They've oftentimes been used very effectively for teen sexuality,
yeah.
The sort of, the animalistic nature within, that sort of thing, right? And but the reality is, I think werewolf movies, I mean, this is my feeling about it, is they're notorious for not having that many like great movies. Like usually when people bring it up, they'll come up with 1940s ones, except that, let's be honest, like the Wolfman is the weakest of the big Universal monster classics.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, honestly, Werewolf of London is better, and that's not like stupendous. Like there's no, this, you're not getting like James Whale level like genius,
right,
in any of this. And then like a lot of times people go to American Werewolf in London, from the early 80s. I was
just thinking that one.
And like I think that's a very good movie, but it doesn't like spark for me, in the same way. So I was going to choose 3.
Okay. What you got?
When Animals Dream, which is a Danish film from 2014 by Jonas Alexander Arnby, dealing with the perennial theme of female teenage sexual awakening.
Mm-hmm. Classic.
Yeah, it's great. It's beautiful, and I would say check it out if you can get a hold of it. It's not really showing on any of the big streaming services, but you can get it from a library or something. And I'm sure there's pay for. And then better known, especially in the U.S., is Ginger Snaps.
So, Fitz, I think we should get together.
No. Out by 16 or dead in the scene, but together forever.
United against life as we know it. Let's get out of here.
What was it?
A big dog, maybe?
Whoa. Whoa? That's it? Whoa?
Think you see werewolves a lot?
Did I change last night? Howl at the moon? How do you feel? Wicked.
Which is definitely a cult classic, right? So genre fans are not going to be surprised. This is also a film dealing with female budding sexuality, but also the relationship between siblings. And it's real brutal and really, really good. Like, shockingly good. And then the other one I suggest is another sort of standout werewolf genre movie, which a lot of times is brought up, which is Dog Soldiers, which is like a kick-ass action movie in a certain, at least for the first part. I kind of don't actually love the end all that much, but it's very well worth watching, and I think it's sort of your top shelf in terms of the werewolf genre.
I've noticed all your examples are fairly recent, though, too.
Yeah, that's just it. They're very recent. I mean,
yeah.
If you go into the 80s, I mean, there's American Werewolf in London, there's Wolfen, there's The Howling, and not to be sacrilegious, but like the reality is, I mean, the American Werewolf in London is head and shoulders above the other two, but the reality is like Wolfen is fine, and so is The Howling, but neither like blows the roof off.
And let's not forget Teen Wolf.
Well, yeah, there's Teen Wolf.
And Teen Wolf 2.
And there is Teen Wolf 2.
Speaking of the 5 movies for 5 days for $5 VHS rentals I used to do, being a Back to the Future fanatic, Teen Wolf and Teen Wolf 2 were watched a lot in my house growing up. Mainly the first one.
I'm just being mean toward them, that's all.
Oh, I'm not saying they're good at all. In fact, if you watch them now, like, it's pretty dicey. But
yeah.
It was definitely one of those like very formative things. Like Michael J. Fox is in it, Marty McFly's in the movie. I'm watching it, which also led me to Casualties of War at way too young of an age. But that trauma will be for a different episode.
But yeah, no, I would say if you want to get like your top shelf, actually interesting, well made, pushing the limits, closer to an art house version. I mean, Dog Soldiers I wouldn't call art house, but it is great.
And that's how it was released, though. I mean, it wasn't like a multiplex film.
It wasn't a multiplex film. It's a small run film. And I would say both Ginger Snaps and When Animals Dream actually fit within that genre, just in terms of the complexity of their themes and characterization.
Cool,
so yeah, that would be what I go for. What do you have?
So let me tell you the chain of events that led me to this subgenre, and we'll have to figure out a good name for it because I'm not comfortable with the name I came up with for it. In a previous episode, I mentioned going through some early 80s Carpenter movies, John Carpenter movies, one of them being The Fog. And I thought The Fog reminded me, one, I love radio, hence podcasting. It just as a format, and the whole radio conceit within that one where she's broadcasting from a lighthouse on the radio, communicating to the town. My brain immediately went to, oh shit, I remember, speaking of art house, Pontypool from 2008, Bruce McDonald's film from Canada.
What you are hearing is an actual radio broadcast. It is the only recording of the event.
Roadblocks preventing people from leaving and entering the area.
Everybody is under quarantine.
We still do not have an official version of these events, and it's very difficult at this moment to get a fix on what has happened.
Oh God! These people are trying to eat their way inside.
They cut into our signal.
Ken?
And their eyes. He's looking at me.
For your safety, please avoid contact with family members and refrain from the following. All terms of endearment. For greater safety, do not translate this message.
Kind of a minor cult status when it came out, and I never watched it. I knew it was like a guy who was on the radio when basically a zombie apocalypse broke out in the town, and they barricaded themselves in and tried to survive the night while broadcasting. And I was like, after The Fog being kind of so in my book, but I liked that radio element. I was like, oh, this is the perfect time to watch Pontypool. which I did, and it's great. And it's not really, I'm not sure if they even use the word zombies or not in that movie. I wish I would have thought of that as I was watching it to write it down, because it's a disease that's passed on, a psychological disease that's passed on via the spoken word. So it's not passed on through a bite or the blood or anything like that. So and they don't really know what the words are. Meanwhile, he's on the radio trying to warn people. So it's like, it was a really good, tight little single location drama. Thriller, actually. Sorry.
It's also just a great premise.
It's a great premise, and it's really, really good. And then I was like, wait, it's a zombie movie but it's not really traditional zombies. So the category I ended up finding was potentially metaphorical zombies. And so I was looking for other zombie movies where, like, it's not really like overtly said to be zombies. So I know on Criterion they're doing like the 70s horror playlist right now. And Bob Clark had a movie on there called alternatively Deathdream or Dead of Night. And I watched that one from 74 because it's basically sort of like a different version of the monkey's paw idea, where it's a Midwestern white family living in suburbia, and the son is off in Vietnam, and they get the word via the military, oh, your son has died, and then the mom is just like, no, it's a lie, and she's just like psychologically convinced that it's a lie, and he's alive. And then of course he shows up that night in the house again. I don't remember if they actually say the word zombie or not. He's just quote unquote acting weird, and then he like strangles the family dog in front of the neighborhood children and traumatizes them, and it gets into some pretty grisly places. And I thought it was solid. It wasn't crazy good, but a really interesting one. But also has that whole like underlying subtext of this is a Vietnam vet returning home, and there's some clear metaphors there for the the psychological trauma of war and becoming numb to violence, et cetera, et cetera. But the standout then I ran into was the master himself, George Romero. I'd never watched the Crazies.
We never thought it would happen.
Nobody gets in or out of their town now. Is that clear?
The girl just died. How do you intend to let the people know about all this?
We were asleep. They dragged us right out of the house.
Are we under martial law? Don't talk to me or anybody else unless you got a voice print check.
All hell's broke loose in town. Nobody knows what's going on.
Now look, you just can't push us around this way.
We've got to get a nuclear weapon in the air above that town.
I taking me no place. Oh, man, this is easy.
They started something they can't stop. The Crazies. Something that inflames. Something that brutalizes. It's madness unleashed by human error. The Crazies. Can they tame it before time runs out?
I'm a key man on the 50 team. A key man. I'm one of the developers of the goddamn thing.
Now, if you want me to get the job done, you get me the stuff I need, and you get it the hell in there before the morning's over.
A small town becomes a giant stockade. Evans City must be contained or leveled.
We're all concerned with Evans City, Mr. Hawks.
If we have to push the button, we just say the weapon went off.
Get me the president.
3,614 people are trapped by an unknown enemy. 5 are on the run. Can they escape the spreading fury of the Crazies?
And reading the description for it, I was like, this sounds like Metaphorical Zombies, and this is the zombie guy, right? I know you're a fan of Romero. You've sung the praises of Martin on the show before, as well as, we talked about him on Night of the Living Dead when we were doing our 60s podcast series. But man, the Crazies is this is like exemplary. Like this is the marquee title of this genre, in my opinion. Like it's not about zombies. It's like zombie adjacent. It's metaphorical zombies. It's an illness that's passed on due to, government experimentation and what is it called in the movie? Trixie. Plane crashes, infects a town. They're all going crazy. And it has that kind of zombie vibe without being zombies.
See, and we need to work through this. I can't work through it right now. I think I'd have to watch the Crazies again.
Yeah.
There are ways where it's like, part of it is, I think the first instinct when people see that movie is, he's retreading, but he's just not doing zombies directly. And that's not what he's doing.
It's not.
there's different themes going on there, and I can't quite tease it all out. Like it works. There's different things you can do, because part of it is, it's not that they're zombies or whatever. It's that they just get more and more aggressive, and they slowly transform, which is like zombies, right? But they get more and more aggressive, and you can have different effects from that you wouldn't get
like
from the zombie
the pregnant
metaphor.
girlfriend or the pregnant fiance, she just gets giggly.
Right.
But again, though, and this is what I found really interesting, and I jumped to it on purpose after Dead of Night, aka Deathdream, because this has another Vietnam thread to it. The two main guys in this are firefighters and buddies, but they're both Vietnam War veterans.
Right. The politics of that movie are fascinating. They are immediate, like right when the U.S. military, right at peak fragging. Right. This is right when the U.S. where like hundreds of officers are being killed by rank and file soldiers in Vietnam. This is a movie for that moment.
Yeah.
The level of hatred those two have toward the military and the glee that they take at shooting at the soldiers who are trying to keep quarantine is really something.
Well, one does, and one is not as much. Like the one who he gives him shit because he was a former Green Beret and his buddy was not.
Right.
But then his buddy gets a little bit more kill happy, which also turns out because he's been infected by Trixie.
That's true. Yeah.
Now, but the weird thing is, so you'd mentioned specifically with Martin and also Romero in general on our 60s series about how people give him shit all the time for like clunky dialogue, and how you thought that like he'd actually does these little tiny personal, kind of drama movies, but just within these specific genres that, or tend to be thought of as exploitative or whatever, a zombie genre or whatever. And you're completely right, because the whole idea with the Crazies, if you're infected by Trixie, is you have to be paying attention very closely to your interpersonal relationships to look for signs of an infection.
Right.
And it's so good. There's like once they kind of hole up and try to stay away from the government, there's a section in the middle where it's like a father, a daughter, the engaged couple who, she is pregnant, and then his Vietnam buddy, the other firefighter. They're all in this farmhouse together, and he deals with like, aggressive kind of uber military mentality that the one buddy has. He also then veers into like this whole incest story all of a sudden, and none of it seems out of place. It's a very natural evolution of the inner workings of a random group of people thrown together and trying to survive. I mean, it doesn't rely on effects, doesn't rely on violence. It's all character driven and dialogue, and it's great.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is, right. Everything is character driven with him, and that's just not, it's just not.
There's no credit for that. He never gets credit for that. He's just the zombie guy.
He never gets credit for it. I feel like, I mean, obviously there are people who have, I mean, it's not like he's understudied, but no, in popular culture, I don't think he really does. And it's actually what the Crazies, I think we were talking about, like what the Crazies allow you to do as opposed to a zombie thing is just that, right? You have all these different reactions and different ways that plays out at an interpersonal level. That if you just said zombies, right. At the same time, it sticks to a same theme of our problems are ones, like in all of his zombie movies, it's humanity that dooms itself. It's not the zombies, right? And
right.
Which The Walking Dead has just like beaten to death. But like he does it so brilliantly generally. And in this case, it's that way too. There's that underlying theme. Then one of my favorite Romero scenes is in Day of the Dead, from the mid 80s. And they're hanging out in this military base underground with all these RVs that are stored down there, I guess, for some reason. And it's just like, just the characters just hanging around, drinking a beer, like talking about like God, how God has abandoned us. They're just chilling.
Yeah.
And it's like really relaxed because like, what are you supposed to do at the end of the world? It's like very contemplative.
Yeah.
And I've read reviews where it's like, yeah, the movie kind of slows down, but then there's blood and guts. And it's like, yeah, I know this is like the Pete Tom Savini level blood and guts in that particular movie. And it's brilliant.
Right.
But why do we care about these people at all? It's because of that scene. And it's so well done.
Right. No, I even thought of you because you've said that to me before as well, if not on the podcast. But I was thinking of that in the middle of the Crazies when they were in this farm. I think they were actually at like the house on a country club or something. But yeah, like if you're there because you want the gore or the Romero blood and guts, you may be there for the wrong reasons. Like that's your problem, not the filmmaker's problem. But the way that the dialogue got going and they created this quick little like kind of family unit-ish group that was just forced together in order to survive. I was like, oh, this is where people would complain that this slows down. I'm completely fascinated. And then it really hurt then emotionally when people started, getting picked off and not making it. because that's another thing with him. It's so fascinating. Like the movies of his that I've seen, and I need to watch a bunch more of his, and actually probably in order, because I think that would be kind of fun. They never end with and this is how we solve our problem. Like this is an Outbreak movie, and I was thinking of other ones that where you have or just the movie Outbreak for one from the 90s. It usually ends with like, we got the serum, we cured that. Like nobody's ever saved or cured in his movies. They're just like Night of the Living Dead. Spoiler alert, you're cheering for the main character. He gets popped off by the end by the locals. This one ends with like, there's no hope. They're not all exactly dead, but they're not heading towards survival.
Right. I mean,
I think as you mentioned, maybe like Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead, there's like, they maybe survived that incident and they're heading off, but like nobody's cured. There's no solution to the problems. It's just waiting for the next catastrophe to happen.
Right. So,
which feels very relevant.
I mean, that's why
it's a town quarantine, martial law. So I was like, oh my God, there are some like, and I know it's not a direct parallel, but there's some pretty serious, like, COVID kind of 2020 vibes watching it this time. We're like, well, okay.
See, I mean, we talked about this before. Part of what's interesting about it to me and what makes it a post-Vietnam War movie as opposed to our moment in the movie is both would be, if you made Crazies now, both would be an incompetent government. But in this case, it is the big faceless government. Mind you, you're basically, it's a movie about, a lot of the movie is about the bureaucrats who are not actually faceless. But they're part of they're part of this big machine, which due to Vietnam is fraying at the seams. Like the soldiers don't know why they're there. Everything's sort of like incompetent and ill-disciplined, and why can't anything work, and why are we doing it in this inefficient way? But it's still part of this big machine. If you were doing this in 2020, it's that you don't actually have a giant machine. They've just deconstruct the giant machine because the Trump administration is based on personalistic ties and control and doesn't trust the machine.
Right.
So there's like, to me, what's interesting is that there's similarities and like real differences. Can I throw out one more into this pseudo genre?
Yeah. What you got?
Or into this. So I think it's zombie adjacent or pseudo zombie or
metaphorical zombie, or I know I need a better name for this category,
but I would I'd say I Drink Your Blood.
Oh yeah,
I Drink Your Blood from 1970. In this case, it's devil worshipping hippies who are fed fed
rabies-filled meat pies.
Rabies-filled meat pies and are total zombies.
So good.
It's good. It's amazing.
Which honestly, that movie could be called The Crazies as well. They just picked I Drink Your Blood because it was paired up with a double feature at the drive-in called I Eat Your Skin, and it just fit thematically to call it I Drink Your Blood.
Yeah, it fits fine.
Yeah. No, that was a good one too. Yeah, I don't have a better name for that, but yeah, it's like zombies without zombies, or without mentioning zombie. So there's something there which is interesting, but I don't think you get any of those films without having the zombie genre there in the first place.
Right.
So there is that. Should we jump into Midsommar?
Let's jump into Midsommar and cults.
All right, as we mentioned at the top of the show, our feature presentation for this wrap-up episode of our Art House Horror Series in October is Ari Aster's Midsommar from 2019. A couple travels to Sweden to visit a rural hometown's fabled Midsummer Festival, which begins as an idyllic retreat, quickly devolves into an increasingly violent and bizarre competition at the hands of a pagan cult.
I told you that I want to go to that festival in Sweden.
No, you said it would be cool to go.
Yeah, and then I got the opportunity and I decided to do it.
I don't mind you going. I just wish you would have told me. That's all.
Dude, she needs a therapist. You've been wanting out of this stupid relationship for like a year now.
And don't forget about all of the beautiful Swedish women you'll meet in June.
Okay, guys.
That's not her again. Seriously?
Babe, what's happening? Danny.
I was so very sorry to hear about what happened.
I'm sorry.
I invited Danny to come to Sweden.
You know what she's been going through.
Christian says you've got this special week planned.
It's sort of a crazy festival. Special ceremonies and dressing up.
That sounds fun.
unbelievable.
Welcome and happy Midsommar. Skål!
What time is it?
9 p.m.
That can't be right. The sky is blue.
This is what 9 p.m. is like here.
How long have you two been together?
Just over 3.5 years.
4 years.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's like another world.
Tomorrow's a big day.
Is it scary?
What is it?
It has special properties.
What am I going through?
We just need to acclimate.
I don't want to acclimate. I want to go.
Absolutely not.
What's happening? I don't know why you invited us.
That's why you look so guilty right now, because you know.
We only do this every 90 years. I was most excited for you to come.
So we're just beginning this segment, and I just want to say, if you have not seen this movie yet, stop listening, watch it, and come back, because we're going to talk about the whole thing. It really doesn't work if you know the end.
Yeah, this episode's not disappearing. You can come back to it whenever you want. And also, actually, if you haven't seen it, presumably you haven't just left already, here's a quick note. There's a couple of versions you could watch it. There is a theatrical release of this movie, which is about 2 hours and 25 minutes. And then there's a director's cut, which just became available on Blu-ray this past July 2020. That's almost 3 hours long. So you have some options as what you want to go watch before you finish listening to the rest of this episode.
So I think it's about mourning and shitty relationships and, well, like I said, mourning and getting over and dealing with death by burning your boyfriend alive in a skinned bear, which
that old story,
which sounds cathartic to me.
Yeah, no, it really is. So interesting the way you described that there. I wanted to make a note right away when we started talking here. We have an inadvertent theme that we've done with our art house horror series so far. First one we did The Witch, David Eggers' directorial debut, writer-director. Then we did Babadook, Jennifer Kent's writing and directing feature film debut. Then we've broken our inadvertent theme by doing the second film that Ari Aster has written and directed after his hit Hereditary, also, in contention for an art house horror pick for this limited series we had here. So we're on to a second film from a filmmaker. But like you said, this is dealing with a lot of unprocessed grief, very similar to what we talked about with the Babadook on our last episode.
Yes, and I think unprocessed grief shows up in a lot of these movies. So it's funny you bring that up in terms of the first and second. I mean, obviously Hereditary would work with this, and I think we were trying to go for the highlights of the genre, the ones that have gotten the most attention.
Right.
And I was pushing for having a spread, right, in time, right? So the first couple are from like 2014 and 15, and the last one is from 2019.
Right.
If we weren't going to repeat directors, I actually would have gone for The Lighthouse, which is Robert Eggers' second one. Because
as a modern, yeah.
I mean, holy hell for a rewatch. Nonetheless, I think, as you point out, like the grief themes are really not uncommon in this kind of movie. In the sort of wave of art horror movie, it's like, and I mean, at some level or another, I mean, this is obvious for a horror movie. All of them seem to. Not all of them. So many of them seem to be dealing with how do you deal with death, to the point at which it actually gets slightly monotonous. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, because it's a pretty universal horror.
Well, because one of the things we've defined as art house horror too is we've mentioned on previous episodes, it's atmosphere, tone, metaphor, symbolism. It's less necessarily plot driven. It's more about the psychological underpinnings of the plot, usually dealing with some sort of trauma, which this movie has plenty of trauma and plenty of unprocessed grief to play with here.
Could we just also say, just before launching in, because I actually sort of want to launch into what's going on with Florence Pugh's Danny Ardor character, is this was also the year that last year was the year that Florence Pugh sort of blew up. Why? Because she gave this beast of a performance, and she is incredible in this movie. And then dominated Little Women in a completely different performance where you cannot even feel a mark of the one and the other. It's just really, she was just really impressive.
Oh, very much so. Actually, I remember she came on our radar working at the Art House Theater. We showed a movie of hers from 2016 called Lady Macbeth that William Oldroyd directed. So it was a period piece, obviously, 19th century rural England. She's a young bride, sold into marriage. And it's just another one of those like just simmering, slow to boil kind of performances that you're just like, this is a powerhouse performance. Like even in the quieter moments there, it's still like, holy shit, like this is someone to watch.
Right. Yeah. She's a total beast in this movie. She carries so much of it. And basically, I mean, when we're talking about mourning and death, just to be clear, at the beginning of the movie, so this is, I mean, so much of this is, if we're dealing with mourning and death, the other thing is shitty relationships and how they end, and how a toxic relationship do we even call it codependent?
I feel like that's a good question. Because he's not exactly like the typical like assertive, dominant one who's like emotionally abusive. It's like neither one of them can actually just decide like, okay, this is not healthy for either one of us. But I don't think that's laid up as codependent necessarily.
Right. Because part of it is her fear. So at the beginning of the movie, she's dealing with her bipolar sister. And it's very clear that this relationship is in trouble because basically she needs support and he doesn't really want to give it, but is still trying to act like a good boyfriend, but is slowly distancing away as opposed to just breaking up, which is, what he actually should do.
Well, the way that Ari Aster also, he does like parallel editing here where she's basically getting the news that her bipolar sister has killed herself and her parents through carbon monoxide poisoning at the time that her boyfriend, Christian, is hanging out with his friends discussing how he's going to finally break up with her. But then tragedy happens. So it's like, haven't they been together for like a couple years? 4 years. 4 years.
It's like 4 years. They've been together 4 years. Like this is like clearly a relationship that is treading water. Like it's not going anywhere. And then her entire family dies.
Right.
And he can't actually break up with her.
You can't be that person, right? So it's a great balancing act because tonally it puts the audience like, you kind of see both sides here. And it's not one of those clear cut. Like if it was a straight up, like a physically abusive relationship, you're like, get the fuck out of this. But it's not like that.
Right. Well, wait, which one should get the fuck out?
Well, she should. If he was being physically abusive to her, then she should be getting the fuck out of there. But I'm just saying, like, he tonally straddles this where, like, maybe that does give the vibe of codependency here where, like, he's not going to leave because, like, he's not an out-and-out asshole. He's just like, I should probably break up with this. This isn't going anywhere. And then, like, tragedy happens.
I mean, I think...
like, well, I can't break up now. Like, she clearly needs some emotional support.
And yet, at the same time, nothing is sincere and nothing is real. And he's not actually... He's being helpful. Supportive... Yeah, he's not actually that helpful. Like he's the problem is that because he doesn't actually care and he's acting like he does. I mean, here's the thing. Let's be clear. As the movie goes on, both him and his friends are all assholes. And some of the worst anthropologists I've ever seen. I'm going to get.
I was going to ask you about that when we get there, but
oh my god! I mean, I look. I was not trained as an anthropologist, but like you actually need NLRB. You actually need permission and need to write off. You need actual paperwork to start doing field work. And so Christian Hughes, the boyfriend in this, starts doing field work, clearly not having done that, which means, and I think this is actually pointed out to him by their friend who's actually part of the cult who lured them in. Like, you won't be able to be peer reviewed on this, And it's like, you're right. Like, this is all the work you're doing right now academically is pointless. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
They're horrible anthropologists. Anyway. This is like one of these relationships which is rotting from the inside, in which intimacy and emotional intimacy is gone, but neither can say what they mean.
Right. And I wonder if they framed that because she is Danny's character. She's a psychology student, I believe, too. Like there's this kind of the initial setup is like, all students or academics. And I thought it was kind of interesting how they're all clearly in this fictional world, committed to like their specific intellectual pursuits, but they all just seem very emotionally stunted. And there's like an inability to actually communicate, even amongst friends to a certain extent, but especially within the Christian and Danny relationship.
Well, and part of it is, I mean, even the way they fall, deal with their intellectual pursuits. I mean, it is, like I said, they're the worst anthropologists. It's, and this is definitely part of academia. They're all sort of glory-seeking, competitive, and none of it's really about what they're actually studying or a passion for that.
Well, I think the Josh character that William Jackson Harper plays, he has that.
He has it, but he has it in a way that's really shitty. Because, ultimately the way that he's killed, he was going to be killed either way, right? Because they're being lured there as sacrifices, shockingly enough.
Yeah.
But it's because he has been told that he will not be allowed to look at the sacred text of this community. And he goes and does it anyway, which I think we briefly at a previous episode talked about, like, the history of anthropology is deeply intertwined with imperialism. Mind you, this is Sweden, so not exactly, the same issues that you would find in a lot of countries in the global south or the formerly colonized countries, whatever. Nonetheless, he is doing something which is completely unethical there.
No, yeah, that part is, which is that it's almost like that horror movie trope where, like, oh, now that you've like had sex, you're unethical, or you violated, social norms or your moral code. Now you have to die. But up until that point, he seems like he's done his research. He's clearly studied, like you said, paperwork wise. He's probably been following the rules in pursuing his what is it, like his thesis project here that Christian hasn't.
It's true. I think what it is true for both of them as they start to compete, what comes out about their characters is that ultimately it is about shallow glory and not, he's done the work, right? Because he was prepared to go to this place to do field work. He has some language skills.
Yeah.
Not very good ones, but I can sympathize with that. But like, the problem with it is that like, they're both doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it for shallow reasons. And you notice this is like the second half of the movie we're already dealing with, as sort of Danny notes that, for instance, in Christian and her boyfriend, her sympathy drains out for how, I mean, not even sympathy, but her revulsion sort of grows as she watches him be callous in how he asks questions, like how cold and academic he is. So, is there incest issues? And it's like, oh, well, we follow the incest taboo, which of course is like an anthropological term, right? So the person who he's asking already is familiar with anthropology, or not just anthropology, but just with like your basic, like
the outsider's questions that would be
right. It's like, it's all so superficial, and she sees right through him.
Oh, right. But then he almost ends up using it as his out. Like, well, I have to stay and study because I've just decided my thesis is going to be on this.
Right.
And she's like, no, we're leaving. Like, we've seen, some horrors already. We got to get out of here. And he's just like, it almost seemed to me like that was his relationship out, where he's like, oh, well, I can't go. I'm doing this thing.
Part of it is they've been trapped in this context, right? In the school context. And when they get out of there, for her, you can see it, right? She's been mourning in the same damn apartment every day, probably sleeping 6 hours or whatever, or during the middle of the day, like you're seeing.
Yeah.
And now she's in this context where she can explore and find new things, and she's both revolted but intrigued, because it offers. I mean, you see this. So part of it is we're introduced to this cult. It seems too good to be true. It's all sort of traditional. I mean, supposedly traditional, sort of Swedish, Midsommar, spirituality or whatever. Until it turns out that all of the members of the cult, when they hit 72, have to jump off a cliff.
Yeah. At a stupta, I think they called it.
Stupta, yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
Which, or they do so gladly. And she's horrified and wants to leave afterwards, but you also see on her face as she glances over, as the explanation is given for why we do this as part of a life cycle, this is actually giving an explanation that gives some meaning to death, which is what she's been struggling with because the death of her family was meaningless.
Oh, for sure. And even during like it's an elderly couple that both jump and then are finished off with a mallet in quite perfect, horror movie fashion, very gristly and all that. But some of them turn away, like the British couple, Simon and Connie, that are there, or the English couple. They're like running around like, what the fuck? Like, we need to help. Like, they are freaking out the way I would be freaking out if I was there and I didn't know what was going to be going on. But Danny almost has like she doesn't quite turn away from the horror.
Right.
And then, like you said, once you get to the explanation there, you can kind of see like, oh, this is giving her some like language and processing for the trauma that she's already experienced.
I mean, is this the movie that says maybe cults are good?
that scene? I don't know. I guess you have to wait for the sequel that I'm sure will never be made to see how Danny finishes her grieving process.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, well,
or maybe it's just that not all cults are completely bad.
I mean, sure, there's human sacrifice and intentional incest breeding, and
but there's a sense of community.
There's a sense of family,
support structure. Yeah,
that's just it. And what she gets, we're just jumping to the end of it. Let's just talk about the themes outside of outside of order. But like part of it is she finds a sense of family and acceptance and affirmation, which she would not get.
She wasn't getting.
Which she wasn't getting, and she couldn't get from her shitty boyfriend.
Yeah,
and they give it to her, and meanwhile he's there as a sperm bank.
That's true. Oh my gosh, yeah. So then, because she wins, she's crowned the May Queen because she wins the Maypole dance competition, and she's clearly accepted, and she's put up literally on a pedestal and carried around. And yeah, there's like a sense of family and belonging and, like love for her that, isn't a thing that she can experience back home because her whole family is dead.
And this takes her away from the familiar, right? Like this is a new space. Their friend Pell, who is from this community, whose parents died when he was young and is there to lure them in as sacrifices. That's what he's doing.
Yeah.
But with her, his intention was always to try to get her joined, mainly because I think he likes her, right? Like,
he's clearly flirting with her. Yeah.
Yeah, he really, he wants. Yeah. So part of it is, but he's luring her there. But what he's seducing her with is the possibility of family.
Yeah.
He's luring her there with everyone else. Like her boyfriend is like superficially attentive, but has no understanding of what she feels. His friends don't like her very much, but know they have to act sympathetic, but like in the most superficial way. And Pell is the only one who not only gets what she's going through, but makes a real effort to empathize and, like.
No, you're right. It's he does it awkwardly because he brings up like his parents, died early too. It was like it felt very sudden, and she reacted as such too, I think, from her perspective. But he remembers her birthday when her boyfriend doesn't. He's clearly trying to make a connection. Also, he talks to her before they even leave. When they're in the apartment, when Christian first tells his friends that like, oh, I invited Danny as well, and a couple of friends are just like, what the fuck? But Pell doesn't really even have that reaction. Also, Pell knows what the point of the trip is as well.
Right.
At that point. So
I think, honestly, we've sort of dug into a lot of the themes. So, I mean, I think that the commonality of she's deeply traumatized. We see her constant sort of panicked hyperventilation, which if anything, we sort of see in modern horror movies dealing with PTSD almost more than almost anything else. Which sort of makes sense with the sort of the culture where we are, with it sort of recognized as an incredibly common thing.
So that panic attack scene she has.
Which one?
Okay, I was visualizing it in my head. I wasn't actually articulating it. So when she sees Christian, who's now just a sperm bank, having sex with I think the character. I'm trying to look at my notes real quick. Maja.
Yeah.
So when Christian is having this very ritualistic sex with Maja, where like some of the other village women are around, or the cult women are around as well,
literally helping.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, literally helping, making sure he ejaculates inside her, that impregnation can happen. So when Danny sees this, though, she has this full-on panic attack after she's won. She's been crowned the May Queen, so she has all these other younger women around her. She runs back to where they're communally sleeping, and all the women like have their hands on her, and they're all slowly start hyperventilating with her and screaming and sharing her pain in a way that she wasn't getting from her boyfriend, in the first scene of the movie when her family dies and she's just crying on his lap and he's like, I'm here. He's literally just a comforting lap that she can cry on. He's doing nothing to actually help her. And then she's actually seems like she's experiencing this communal bond now with the other women in the cult, as they're clearly empathizing with her emotional state.
And then at the end of the movie, when so part of it is it's all the new people who actually, most of them have been killed. Only her boyfriend is not dead. He's paralyzed in a skinned bear, because that's his role. But everybody else, it's like literally like stuffed versions of their skin. They've already been killed as sacrifices. But then 2 members of the cult. And when they've set the little wooden temple on fire, and when they hear one of the members of the cult start to burn and scream, and they've willingly sacrificed themselves, but when they all start doing the same thing, right? They all start doing the empathetic thing. I mean, that's just, I don't want to say like the movie is, I mean, that is what's so interesting is that this cult does provide the empathetic space that she needs, right? So they all start wailing and acting as if they are in pain, in sympathy with this person. Well,
also because she is May Queen, she's given the choice then, is it going to be Christian or another local? Because they require, I think I wrote this down right, they require 9 sacrifices in order to purge the commune of evil.
As you do. I mean, these things come up.
You got to get the evil out. So that the first 4 victims were all the outsiders. You had like the English-British couple, you had Mark and Josh, and then it's left up to the May Queen, which is Danny, and she chooses her boyfriend instead of one of the locals to be the 9th and final victim.
Right. And this is after she's seen him cheat. So here's a point. This is after they've, part of what I actually think, what I love about this movie is the trajectory of the relationship under new conditions. Like, I think this is a great profile of a relationship and the complex emotions. Because as his sort of pathetic attempt at being the sympathetic boyfriend starts to come apart, as they're in a new context and she starts to find something new, and then she starts to actually literally strike out at him, and then you can see the relationship come apart at the seams. Then sort of seeing him cheating in a communal sex scene, in which, talk about sort of like female centric sex, where it's like very clearly like he is an instrument, and it's the women are there to support the younger member of the community. But her level of upset, her level of how upset she is in that scene, that was actually maybe the one false note for me. Because is she that shocked at this point? Or is it just that's because she's so fragile, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because like she clearly doesn't have a connection with his friends. Her family's all dead. This is sort of like the last thing, like, okay, this is like my last tether to any sort of semblance of normal life from back home is now gone. Like, this is just like, okay, this relationship is done. This is it. That's over. So it's almost just like, she's not just crying about that. I felt like she was breaking down because of like everything at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, her facial work. I mean, in the final scene where she goes from
just sobbing in horror and then just like transition to a smile. Yeah. That scene, the communal scene I was just talking about earlier, when everyone was crying and having kind of a collective panic attack together, but then also the wail that she has at the beginning when she finds out that her family's dead, and again she's crying on a very unaffectionate, unsupportive boyfriend's lap. It really harkened back to Ari Aster's first film, Hereditary. Toni Collette's performance is just as raw and just as powerful, and because those are usually scenes to me in movies that can ring so sour or flat, like you were saying, like it doesn't quite hit home because you're like, oh, you're just projecting intense grief. Yes, you can scream, you can put on some fake tears or whatever, but in both of those movies and in both of these instances by both actresses, like you feel it.
Yeah,
it's there.
It is real. They're both of them. Like both of them. There's some really good casting work going on here, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's working in tandem. It's great writing, it's great directing, and it's great performance. And also, I think it's also a certain amount of restraint from a director in post-production where there isn't a bunch of musical, or there's not like a score or a spot on the soundtrack that's telling you, oh, this is sad. Oh, you should be crying now. I can't even honestly remember right now off the top of my head if there's music even or any sort of orchestration going in those scenes to heighten the emotion. Because like I'm so focused on the impact of the narrative and the performance at that point. But I feel like the music isn't telling you how to feel. It's the performance and the narrative.
Or the music is so seamlessly fitting in
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. This is the thing. I mean, I think part of the reason to choose this movie for this ending is like the other two, and like sort of what sort of makes this crop of art house horror so noticeable is the perfection of the crafting, right?
Yeah.
The editing, the lighting, the way that music is deployed combined with acting and emotion, and the way that emotion is used. There's enough, there's just not. I mean, I sort of said there was a scene, but I think your argument for why she's feeling that way makes sense. Like, I'm convinced there aren't false notes. They're some of the best indie movies of their respective years, and this is too, in my opinion. I think, could we just talk a little bit about the use of light?
I was just going to say, when you said light there, I wanted to interrupt right away because, like, it's a horror film. It's all in daylight.
Right. It's set in Sweden in the summer in the north, which means there's basically no darkness. There's just a couple hours of darkness at night.
Well, it doesn't even seem like darkness because, like, when the Josh character that William Jackson Harper plays, when he sneaks out, like you said, to look at some of the sacred texts and take pictures of them, it has almost like that magic hour look. Like, it's not really night. It has more like that perfect, like, dusk,
right,
kind of color to it, which is really interesting.
And so what to unsettle us?
Yeah.
Like, well, you go. Like, what is so unsettling about having endless daytime?
I was kind of expecting it to be commented on more by the characters, and I really liked that it wasn't. It's sort of mentioned at first where they're like, wait, what day is it? Because your circadian rhythms kind of get off when you're like, there's no, like, you sleep, but there's no, like, true darkness. It'd be the same as if you go up to, like, Norway or Denmark or someplace where it's like or northern Canada, where, like, you have the same sort of thing, but it's all dark, and you get, like, a moment of sunlight every now and then. That it messes with you, but it almost, to me, was like a how do you make it suspenseful? And I kind of hesitate to call it horror because it doesn't quite feel like straight horror film to me when it's all in daylight.
I
think it's the rituals, maybe.
Oh, I think it's totally a horror movie. I think it's just it's the folk horror subgenre.
Okay.
And I think part of the horror is the daylight. Part of whereas darkness is usually used to keep you off ground because you can't see what's happening.
Right.
This light is used in a different way to make both the characters and the audience feel uncomfortable. Just as the characters, like the incredible costume designs, which are ridiculous, right? Like, I mean, they look in a lot of ways very silly, these sort of folk costumes that the cultists are wearing, but that in itself is what makes it uneasy, right? Like,
yeah. Well, especially, the visuals, like when they have their collective meals, and the tables are always arranged in different character letters or whatever. If you don't see any of the main protagonists, it feels very otherworldly or of another time period. And then you see the people with, like, modern dress or pulling out a cell phone. You're like, oh God, yeah, that's off. Oh no, it's still 2019 or whatever. And
right.
Also, the architecture in this village is astounding. It's like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari level in some of it. Like, the roofs go at weird slants on some of them, and then you have the main temple that they burn down at the end. In itself is like this really kind of interesting triangular. I was trying to go back and I can't remember. I don't remember where it started from, but like the imagery of, like, the woman could be a V shape or like a symbol, I guess, and like symbology. So I was thinking about that as I was watching it too, because it's a perfect, like, triangle, little, like, A-frame temple, I guess, that that they burned down at the end. But throughout the village, there's the architecture is just off to a certain extent. There's weird angles to roofs. There's, like, the whole communal sleeping area with amazing murals kind of all over the walls. And again, like you said, because it's set in daytime and it's always lit, you get to see all of it all the time as well.
Well, I think, what part of what they're doing with the light, with the architecture, with the happiness of everyone around you, I mean, it's the Stepford Wives. Is that the right analogy? It's the perfection that creeps you out, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
And then it's the sheen that then jumps to sudden extreme violence, which they then treat with the exact same tone of emotionlessness, or this
or joy,
this sort of, like, or joy, like absolute joy, or sympathy, or just this false sympathy, but real, because they really believe it. They really, when they've drugged Christian and are putting him in the bear suit. It's all very matter of fact, and they're like, totally sympathetic, but it's just what they're going to do.
Right.
It's the uncanny valley effect of perfection and happiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what's creepy about one layer of what can be creepy about cult films, right? Which is sort of our theme today. Is this is the happy cult? This is the one where it actually looks great, and she gets incorporated in, except for these things, and that it curves around so much that the horrible things that they do are also very happy.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because most other cult films I was thinking about, especially the one I'm going to recommend here at the end, is more it has the veneer of happiness, but really there's something else going on underneath, which this movie does have that, but they're also not hiding it as they go throughout the narrative either, to a certain extent.
Well,
which is interesting.
I don't really pick up on any cracks in the cult. They are seamless.
Well, because then even Danny at one point is talking to Christian when they I don't know. There's a couple points where like, oh, did they finally just break up? What's going on here? When she wants to leave, and she even points out, she's like, why do you think you are here? Like, they are not going to let you go. And I think it's after the elderly, the 272-year-olds jump off the cliff, and then the whole mallet smashing them up and everything. When she talks about how like they're not going to let you publish any of this. Like, why do you think you are here? You're like, you aren't some chosen one to like finally tell their story. We need to get the fuck out of here. This could be dangerous. Yeah.
Which part of, so here's God, he's such a, that's what I mean about sort of the bad academic sort of like arrogance they have, is like he's so blinded by
the sensational aspect of what he thinks he's got.
Right, which is, it'd be like a bad reporter. In this case, it's a bad academic. He's so blind to what's happening to him because he wants to be able to exploit it because it'll look good in a journal.
Well, and also he's stealing it from his friend, who's actually, like you said, previous to violating the norms and going in and see the sacred text, has like put in the work and the research. And well, granted, it's because he knows Pell at school and has heard about these customs and has gotten into it. So like I think he goes into it a bit more with pure intentions, whereas Christian is just like, he sees the death thing. He's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, I got to write this. He's like, so then he just completely steals the topic from his friend.
Which is also a classic academic bullshit thing. No, I mean, I think, well, so we sort of disagree. I think the friend he's more pure in the sense that he's actually done his research. This was actually
that was all I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, he's actually done a research plan where he's going to go to multiple different countries to do this.
Right.
It's a comparative, research study. But in reality, I think he's actually not much better, because I think he's viewing these things in the same way. His greed for knowledge and the glory that comes from it is not actually his undoing, because he was always screwed, but like is his immediate undoing that ends him up in a garden. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some real body horror in this one. Ooh. I'd prefer a good skinning there.
Oh yeah, that doesn't seem like that'd be too. Well, I mean, I guess they skin the bear and then they put the skin on a human.
That's true. That's true.
That's there. Do you have any other final thoughts on Midsommar specifically as a film that we haven't gotten to yet?
I mean, I would just want to say, like, I think after I've talked this through again, I mean, the first time I watched it, it's so overwhelming in theaters that it was, in some ways, I just knew it was very good and that it was effective at manipulating me, which is what a good movie does, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The second time I watched it, I think I was tired and I've watched too many horror movies, and so I thought it was very good, but it didn't quite hit me. And then talking it through and all the elements, it's once again in my head just superlative for what it is, and really impresses me.
So as we wrap up Midsommar here and go on to the general idea of cults as a theme or as a subgenre within horror, what is it about cults as a character device or as a setting or as a narrative that lends itself to the horror genre? Or is it something that it should be specific to the horror genre?
I mean, I think it is something that's very specific to the horror genre. And I think, sometimes it's like a counter society, especially when there's sort of Satanism. It's It's like a mystical conspiracy story, right? Like it's the unseen power that controls things, and you can't trust those around you.
Right.
It's the counter society that we see in Midsommar, where like there's a sheen of conformity and pleasantness that then turns horrible.
Well, that's the follow-up then, right? Like what makes it the work of horror rather than, specifically like comedy or maybe drama. I mean, drama kind of overlaps with horror to a certain extent, but I've always kind of felt, at least the effective ones are one of those that, like, as a viewer, you realize, oh, I could be susceptible to this.
Mm.
Or there's a fear of that where, like, people naturally seek out like communities and want acceptance and feeling a sense of belonging. And then I think the cult narrative takes it, to usually more terrifying or horrific ends.
Right. I think that is true. It's like, what is the appeal? I mean, this is a movie that the one we've just been talking about is one that plays into that very deeply, right? Because there's there's a lot in this cult that's appealing at the same time that, whatever, which is oftentimes not true because, the cult is fully unmasked as, horrible or involving sacrificing you or whatever.
Well, yeah, because like in Midsommar, you've got it on a couple levels. One, there's like the clear academic interest from these grad students, but then there's also the emotional and community interest that Danny has once she's there and starts to feel some acceptance that she wasn't, as we said, outside back in the real world. But also, like when we were watching I Drink Your Blood, which we referenced earlier as kind of like that metaphorical zombie thing, that's a satanic hippie cult that rolls into town and, causes death and destruction. The problem we were saying as we were watching that one was that, like, why would anybody fucking join this cult? It's terrible. So you need to have that element of I don't know, charisma, I guess, at least have a charismatic cult leader. Or the draw of the cult itself is like, oh, like again with Midsommar, you'd be like, oh, this is like, it's so idyllic. It's out here. It's very like communing with nature. It's a very intense sense of community. And oh my gosh, there's these cool rituals involved, and there's really great food, or whatever. Or
it's the charismatic leader that transforms. Part of it is there's an invasion of the body snatchers appeal to cults where you can see somebody a character transformed into something that they're not.
Right.
There's a mind control element to it. There's actually, cults are really versatile. There's a reason they're in a lot of horror movies. And I think they're also just fascinating because they're real, right? Like there's lots of...
Oh, that's actually, I think you hit something on the head there, because that makes a lot of sense, because we've said before with like some of the previous movies we talked about, like zombies, not real, ghosts, not real. Like there's so many things that aren't real in werewolves, vampires. Yeah. But the cult aspect is like, hey, that happens.
Right. It's like metaphor. Actually, I mean, like, I don't actually think that a Swedish cult could quite pull off this much killing for long term in Sweden. But
no, but you've got like Om Shinrikyo, and there's actual cults that have done serious damage to the public at large.
Right. That have done really real things.
Yeah.
I mean, look, we're living in the era of a fast spreading cyber cult with millions of followers, right? I mean, if you're talking about QAnon. Right.
I'm sorry, you're going MAGA, or you're going QAnon, or both, or
MAGA,
which way?
MAGA I wouldn't call a cult so much as a horrifying white nationalist movement. No, I mean, I think QAnon is a legitimate mass scale cult that's created an alternate reality in which people have totally lost themselves. So,
I mean, I want to do the checklist right now, but like, yeah, it checks so many of the boxes of cult.
Yeah. So part of it is that that'll be horror movie fodder for years.
Oh, yeah, I would definitely watch that too.
I mean, part of it is, except that part of it is like parody being dead, like satire being dead. You can't make this shit up because it's the actual horror movie.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no, we live in an era in which, white nationalism and political decline have led us to the cult as a mass phenomenon.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it could be too that like the idea of a cult and its role or its power within a society is also evolving, and it's not the same as it was in like the 60s or the 1800s. Like it's an evolving organism itself as well as a concept.
Yeah. So do you have any additional, because every episode we added some additional recommendations. Do you have any cult movies?
I do. Well, I I have one that came to mind at first because when we were doing the prep for this, I was like, oh, this one I just watched like a year or two ago for the first time. And I really enjoyed it. And then you brought up Ty West because you watched The House of the Devil. And we were discussing like kind of 1980s horror.
Speaking of movies with cults in them.
And cults, yeah. Satanic Panic. Guys, Satanic Panic. Is that like the 80s version of QAnon?
No, I mean, that's a mass hysteria.
Mass hysteria is a little different, yeah. It wasn't like a cohesive, yeah.
Well, it's related, but the internet helps to force us into a legitimate, actual cult movement.
Oh, God, picture, Satanic Panic, but with the internet. Jesus, I don't even... Oh, anyway, that's a different script we can write on our own. No, I went back to, because when you mentioned Ty West, the first movie I'd watched of Ty West was The Sacrament from 2013, also starring Joe Swanberg, noted awesome indie director. It's also brings up a subgenre, not necessarily always of horror, but definitely a lot of horror that I love. And I've been told over the years that it should be a guilty pleasure and I shouldn't love it, but I do, and I don't give a shit, is the found footage movie. Found footage horror left a huge stamp on me because I saw Blair Witch Project when it came out, like in theaters, when there was a whole, speaking of like early internet, when there was a whole idea of like, is it real? Isn't it real? Like I went to see that movie with some friends, one of them who was convinced it was real, big X-Files guy. So that's not really a surprise, I guess. And was ready to like head to, Maryland to go investigate the Blair Witch after the movie was done. 100% convinced it was real. Early, website for the movie. I think it was a Sci-Fi Channel, like another, quote unquote documentary about it. But anyway, there's a huge found footage genre within horror, and The Sacrament kind of plays into that in an interesting way because it's a barely disguised Jonestown Jim Jones story. But in this case, it's a journalist who works for Vice, feelings about that company aside. They are kind of known to be covering, bizarre news or whatever. So he goes to investigate his sister, Carolyn, who is played by the awesome Amy Semmets. Look up her indie career. She's a fantastic writer, director, actress. So she joins this like intentional community abroad and she finds it as her new family. It's a total Jonestown story, but it's all shot with like the journalistic footage of the Vice news crew that's going there to document it. So it has the whole like, oh, isn't this community happy? What a perfect community. What's going on? And then you slowly see the cracks in it and it slowly turns into a horror nightmare.
We've been to some of the most chaotic, war-torn places in the world, but never for something as bizarre as this.
Here we are. Welcome to Eden Parish.
You guys built all this?
Father had a vision, and we built heaven here on earth.
Who is Father?
He's the guy that started all of this.
Can we speak with him at some point?
He agreed to sit for an interview tonight at the gathering.
It's been pretty amazing. Everyone we've talked to seems to feel that this is everything they ever wanted, and they all credit you for that.
Oh, I don't deserve the credit. You come down here and I'll give you a place to live. I'll give you a job. I'll give you a bed. These people are my family, my children. And when you write this up, just know that you're dealing with their lives.
Aren't those the guides? What are they doing with guns?
You don't know what's really going on here. This place is not what it seems.
Hey, what's happening? These people want to leave. They have their suitcases packed. I have no idea what to do.
Sam, do not get involved in this!
Please take my daughter.
What?
We can't let them go back to New York. No, this is the last sacrament.
Hey! Hey!
How many more people can fit in this thing?
No! What is
Take the camera. I want you to film this. It's important.
It's fine.
Take it. Take it. Take it.
I don't care that Metacritic's got it at 49. It's awesome. I really enjoy that movie.
I'm sorry, but Metacritic is gonna, this is.
Well, there's that tinge of guilt when you really like something and you check out the critics and you're like, what the fuck? Nobody understands this? What's going on here?
Yeah, no, actually, I'm with you here.
Yeah. It still stings a little bit. That's all.
Yeah, well, you know what? Sometimes the critics are wrong. In fact, a lot of times the critics are wrong. I mean, are we critics? I don't know. Do we count? Yeah.
I say we do.
All right, there we go. Well, these critics...
We're people on the internet talking about movies. We count. What do you got for cult movies?
I've got
literal cult movies.
I've got 3. I've got 3 cult movies spanning the decades.
All right. Lay 'em on me.
All right. I'm going to start with 1943's The Seventh Victim, directed by Mark Robeson, but very significantly produced by Val Lewton, the great RKO horror producer who revolutionized what horror is with his low budget flicks in the early to mid or into the late 40s, starting with Cat People. I mean, these are, this is sort of counterposed against the, your Universal monster style, which has sort of gotten goofy. These are dark, existential, sort of basically the grandparent, the deep grandparent of the films that we're watching today. And The Seventh Victim is a film about a satanic cult, which of course is, the bread and butter of the cult genre. Well, beside the point, this is a meditation on death and what it means and whether it's better just to give up to it. I'm just going to say that.
Well, it's also another, I think it's a missing sibling, isn't it?
It is a missing sibling. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's trying to find.
So again, someone has been lured into the cult. You have to go investigate the missing and you discover, oh no, Satanists or, whatever, pagans.
But in the end, it's just, with Luton, it's always going to be about like the meaning of death, which,
right.
Fair enough. The second one is going to be the most obvious, especially for Midsommar, you can possibly choose, and I don't care. Okay? I don't give a shit. It has to be mentioned. The original Wicker Man.
I am here to investigate the disappearance of a young girl. Where is Rowan Morrison?
If Rowan Morrison existed, we would know.
I suspect murder.
Sergeant, I've already told...
In the name of God, woman, what kind of mother are you? That can stand by and see your own child slaughtered.
You are the fool, Mr. Harry.
You're liars. You are despicable little liars.
From the 1970s, which we've actually only gotten a complete version of because it wasn't successful, got shot to pieces. We've only gotten a complete version of really in the last 20 years. I think it's Christopher Lee's greatest performance, the great classic horror, Hammer horror actor who's also been, who's like, I think he had the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of movies. And it is your classic, primordial folk horror film, which is what Midsommar is about.
Oh, yeah.
A, island cult of pagans who, but you know what? I'm not going to give away much. Let's just say it's practical. I'm actually ripping this off of somebody who was talking about this on Twitter the other day. It's practically a musical. If you haven't seen it, the songs are great.
Okay.
And it's puritanical Christianity versus hedonistic paganism. It's a lot, and it's one of the greatest horror movies of all time. This is not a controversial take.
Right.
The final movie I'm going to choose is, I think, part of the art horror movie wave that we are sort of covering today, or that we've been covering this month, and that would be Mandy by Panos Cosmatos.
His fist closed around the serpent's eye. Strange and eternal.
I need you to get me that girl I saw. Do you know what to do? You're a special one, Mandy. I, too, am a special one. Let us be so very special together.
So what you gonna do with that thing?
I'm going hunting.
So what you hunting?
It's crazy evil.
It was his second movie. His first movie, Beyond the Black Rainbow, was also about creepy sort of post-70s, future techno-cults.
It's good, but I would say watch Mandy first, get into his style, and then see where he kind of tried out that style at.
See, the funny thing, I both agree with that. I also think that Beyond the Black Rainbow actually isn't good. I think its pacing is god-awful, but I think all the elements are gorgeous and beautiful. So it's worth seeing just to see what he's doing.
No, I'm totally with you there, but I think you need to be into his stuff first. And I
Right.
think Mandy's a great entry point, and then you'd be
Yeah.
like, wait, what else has he done? And I think you'll appreciate it more and you'll be able to sit through the whole thing. Because it's one of those, it's an hour and 50 minutes, but it's going to feel like 3 hours and 50 minutes.
Yeah, and that's, yeah. So, but Mandy is fantastic. It is literally it is a living, like, metal album cover from, like, the early 80s come to life.
It really is.
And
that's a great description.
And that is what it is meant to be. Like, it's incredible. And it's also, one of the best uses of latter-day crazy ass Nick Cage of all time. And I'll get into the cult element in a second, but I just want to say this is actually one of my favorite theater experiences because I saw it at the movie theater that we both used to work at. And, it's a late night show.
Yeah, I was only playing during like the 9 p.m. round for a few weeks.
And basically everybody in there is there to see crazy Nick Cage. This is going to be hilarious. And this is a movie which is so intense, like, and so over the top. There is a chainsaw duel, and it is great. There are acid demon bikers. And yes, there is a post-60s burnout, the most pathetic, awful folk music, 60s folk musician turned horrific, like, rapist cultist you can imagine. And that's, that is it. He's legitimately just pathetic and awful. I mean, talk about like the sort of the horrible remnants of like the worst of hippie culture, right? And it's just, with just like the most killer soundtrack imaginable. But you go into this and like, there's a scene where Nicolas Cage is sitting on a toilet with alcohol in his underwear, crying. And one guy starts laughing and then realizes no one else is laughing. And this is a perfect scene to laugh at Nicolas Cage just overacting. But here's the thing is this is a movie that is so fucking crazy and over the top and intense that Nick Cage is not overacting. It fits him perfectly. And nobody is reacting the way they expected to react because it's appropriate. The emotions have been played out. Everything in the movie that you've seen so far makes sense. And so I love that scene, right? Like the movie overpowered their sort of starky cynicism for going to see is so bad it's good because this is just too good for that.
Yeah.
And no, it's an incredible movie. It's a great Nick Cage vehicle for what he is now. And it's beautiful at every level. Great performances down the line, and with really just a truly obnoxious cult. Like, you just want to see them get the shit kicked out of them. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It
actually, again, not to harp on it too much, but it goes back to the satanic hippie cult "And I Drink Your Blood," where you're like, you kind of wonder, why did anybody ever join this cult?
Do they really like his music? Because we hear some of it, and I mean, he's like, I'm better than Peter, Paul, and Mary. And it's like, you're really not. Like,
well, the beauty of this movie is they don't give you any time. There's no time to breathe in this movie. Like, it's off and running, and it's writing its own rules, and it's running at its own pace, and you just go with it. You don't really have that time. Like, there's just also so much garbage in "I Drink Your Blood" that you have time to go like, what the fuck kind of cult is this? Who would ever even join? There's no charisma here. There's no nothing. You don't really get that time to think or breathe with Mandy. You're off and running on this crazy roller coaster ride.
See, the thing with him is he's actually like a classic cult leader, as in like a wounded masculine figure who has found broken people and surrounded himself. Whereas,
that's true, yeah.
Yeah, whereas "I Drink Your Blood," it's like, we know who the leader of the cult is, but like, he's just kind of an asshole. He doesn't give himself an air. He does have an air of authority in terms of doctrine, but he doesn't have that air of authority. Like, one of the things, you do is you sort of separate yourself from the group and have somebody else do your physical work for you. Right? You create that air of like, I'm a messianic figure, and in "I Drink Your Blood," there's no one who's messianic.
Right.
They're all a bunch of like rebellious hippies, and that's sort of what's going on. Whereas these are all like hippies, 10 to 15 years out, and oh god,
that's true, because this one it's more like they've already put the time in. So like, what else are they going to be doing? And also, they're on such like a streak. They're also on such a nightmarish streak of horrors that like there's already no turning back. These are, like you said, these are already broken people.
Right. In this twisted like metal Lovecraftian world.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are my 3 picks, and I think
those are good. Yeah. good span of time as well. But all right, well, the horror is not stopping just because October is over. We're all still living through the year of 2020 after all. So, Isaac, what have we got up next for?
So we're gonna take on the impending election, which, however it ends up and whatever happens, some outcomes are less horrible than others. We're not going to pretend that these two candidates, whatever we actually think of both of them, are of equal levels of awfulness. One being a white nationalist, the other being sort of a standard neoliberal Democrat. Nonetheless, this election seems like it's going to be god awful and could maybe even last for months. So we're going to try to, ease the pain by watching the Purge election year.
And also, we get our Frank Grillo fix.
If you haven't been listening to the podcast for very long, it's been quite some time since we did our double action movie extravaganza with
Wolf Warrior 2 and Invasion USA.
With Wolf Warrior 2 and Invasion USA, this podcast loves Frank Grillo. We have a crush on Frank Grillo, and this is going to give us that fix. And I think we're both really excited because maybe Frank can get us through these very difficult times.
Yeah, it's either going to be a cathartic watch to exercise some anxieties, or it's going to turn into a fucking documentary before our eyes.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's way too close.
There is that potential. So
yeah.
All right. Well, until next time, then. Signing off. I am Aaron Spears,
and I'm Isaac Miller. And stay safe out there for all the many reasons to stay safe.